He was wearing a $3,000 suit, holding a titanium boarding pass, standing inside the most exclusive lounge in the terminal, when the concierge looked him dead in the eye and asked if he was making a delivery. Mustater. No shame. Just the kind of casual insult only people with power think they can get away with. And the only thing that made him suspicious? His skin. This isn't a story about an accident. This is about what happens when quiet disrespect meets the wrong man at the wrong gate and realizes too late that he's the one deciding whether your airline lives or dies. You're about to witness a 10-stage fall from privilege. Every fake smile, every microaggression, every glass of champagne handed around him, not to him. They thought he'd complain. He didn't. He documented, calculated, waited. And then he made a single phone call that flipped the entire airport upside down. Want to know how power really works? Stick around. Drop a comment. What moment hit you hardest? Where are you watching from? And if you believe respect shouldn't come with a dress code or a skin tone, hit subscribe. This is just the beginning. Jordan Ellis wasn't a man who walked into a room without owning it. At 39, he'd built a name in finance that whispered power in high-rise conference rooms and exclusive investor retreats. Dressed in a tailored charcoal suit and crisp white shirt with no tie, his signature style, he strode through Terminal G's private corridor toward the Sovereign Air Titanium Lounge. His luggage was a sleek carbon fiber Toomey roller, and on his wrist gleamed a black dial Audemars Piguet, understated but unmistakable. Yet none of that seemed to matter the moment he stepped into the marble-floored lounge foyer. Behind the reception desk stood Olivia Harding, a woman in her early 40s with frosted blonde hair tied in a tight bun and an expression that had been curated over years of managing exclusivity. She looked up, scanning Jordan from his polished shoes to the dignified calm in his posture, and didn't even bother hiding her skepticism. "Excuse me, sir," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" Jordan's brow rose slightly, the question registering like a slap disguised as courtesy. "Yes," he replied, calmly handing over his member ID. Jordan Ellis, Titanium Class. Olivia took the card, glanced at it for barely a second, and paused, not to verify the name or the membership, but to calculate. She tapped the screen slowly, as if waiting for the system to reveal some inconsistency. "I see," she murmured, still not moving from her spot. "It's just. We don't usually see guests arrive from that direction." Her tone laced the words with implications she didn't voice. Before Jordan could respond, the glass doors behind him whooshed open again. A young white man in a University of Michigan hoodie and sneakers stepped in, earbuds hanging loose from his collar. He looked around, waved casually, and strolled toward the desk. "Morning, Liv," the guy called. Olivia lit up like a Christmas tree. "Zach, so good to see you again," she said, reaching under the counter to grab a flute of champagne. "Let me guess, heading to Aspen again?" No ID was requested. No credentials. Just familiarity. Jordan stood silently to the side, his ID still in Olivia's hand, unacknowledged. Zach took his drink and walked past without so much as a glance. The contrast was stark. Not in service, in certainty. Zach belonged. Jordan had to prove why he did. Eventually, Olivia turned back. "All right," she said, voice cool again. "You're cleared. You can proceed inside, Mr. Ellis." There was no apology for the delay, no acknowledgement of the double standard. Jordan took back his card, offered a polite nod, and walked through the frosted glass doors without another word. Inside, the lounge was cathedral quiet, glass walls overlooking the tarmac, plush seating arranged like a five-star hotel, staff gliding in silent choreography. Jordan didn't stop to look around. He knew this world, knew the rituals. He wasn't here to experience luxury. He was here to observe behavior. And already, he'd seen more than enough. Jordan took a breath, trying to keep his expression neutral as he crossed the threshold into the Sovereign Air Titanium Lounge. Despite the delay at the reception desk, he moved with the quiet confidence of a man who knew exactly what he had access to. He had traveled with Sovereign Air for over 7 years, sat in boardrooms with the very executives whose photos adorned the lounge's glossy annual reports, and his titanium status wasn't just earned, it was legacy tier, a classification reserved for strategic investors and stakeholders. Yet the moment he stepped past the entryway, he could still feel the cold residue of Olivia's gaze following him. As he settled near the lounge's main bar area, a server passed by without acknowledgement. No water offered, no welcome cocktail tray extended. Jordan adjusted his cufflink, pulled out his phone, and began reviewing notes for the meeting awaiting him in New York. Then Olivia reappeared. "I'm sorry to bother you, Mr. Ellis," she began, her voice thin and falsely cordial. "There's been a small issue with the verification of your titanium card. The system couldn't validate the serial code. Do you mind stepping back out to the reception desk while we rescan it?" Jordan looked up from his phone, blinking once. "Isn't this the same card I've used to access this lounge 3 times this quarter?" Olivia's expression didn't change. "Yes, well, that's part of the issue. There's a possibility that the card may have been flagged. Sometimes these things happen. Just a formality." Jordan rose slowly, his jaw tight, but his movements composed. As he followed her back through the frosted doors, he caught a glimpse of 3 new guests entering the lounge behind him. 2 middle-aged men in golf polos and a younger woman in a sundress and designer shades. The man in front flashed his phone screen lazily at the desk, didn't stop walking, and Olivia's assistant behind the counter smiled, waved them through, and handed them flutes of chilled Prosecco. No ID check, no scan, no system issue. Back at the reception counter, Olivia tapped impatiently on her tablet, as if trying to will an error message to validate her suspicion. "Just waiting for backend to confirm," she said. "I've asked security services to do a rapid identity check on the account." Jordan's voice remained calm, but there was steel behind it now. "You requested a security check for a titanium-class investor using his own card." Olivia shrugged. "It's protocol when a serial mismatch occurs. We've had guests in the past who borrowed status from someone else." Her words were sugar-coated, but the insinuation landed like a dart. She didn't believe the card was his. She didn't believe the name belonged to the man in front of her, and nothing about her body language suggested otherwise. As the minutes stretched, Jordan stood silently, watching as another pair of guests breezed by. One of them, an older man with white hair and a suit 2 sizes too large, approached the counter mid-conversation on a Bluetooth headset. He didn't present anything, just nodded toward Olivia's assistant and said, "Back from Dubai. Same gate." The assistant smiled, nodded, and waved him through without hesitation. Jordan looked down at his own titanium card, still in Olivia's hand, then at the guests passing through behind him with unchecked access. It wasn't about the system. It never was. It was about trust, and who they thought deserved it by default. Olivia finally glanced up from the screen, still waiting on the confirmation. Shouldn't take more than a few minutes longer. Jordan didn't respond. He simply returned to his place by the wall, arms crossed, eyes steady, not angry, not surprised, but measuring, as if he were the one conducting the audit, not them. Olivia returned to tapping. Behind her, the Prosecco glasses clinked again, and at that moment, the security terminal blinked to life. The screen blinked, the alert cleared, and Olivia's forced smile returned with it. "You're all set," she said lightly, sliding the titanium card back across the counter like it hadn't been clutched in her hand for the past 15 minutes. "System confirmed the match. Feel free to enjoy the lounge." Jordan didn't take the bait. He picked up his card wordlessly and turned toward the doors again, re-entering the lounge with the same composed gait, though now the air around him felt heavier, not because of any weight he carried, but because of the subtle tension left behind by everyone who'd questioned if he belonged. Inside, the music was soft and the lighting warm. Attendants moved like choreographed dancers, carrying glasses, folding napkins, aligning furniture with invisible precision. Jordan scanned the room for a moment, then made his way to the far end where 2 massage chairs sat beneath the skylight. One was empty. The other was occupied by a businessman snoring lightly through a silk eye mask. Jordan settled into the empty chair, sinking back with a quiet sigh, closing his eyes for the first time since he landed that morning. But the peace lasted less than 60 seconds. A voice cut in, bright, practiced, and slightly too loud. "Excuse me, sir," said a young attendant, her blonde ponytail bouncing as she approached. "I'm so sorry, but this station is reserved for our priority frequent flyers, those who've logged over 500 hours this quarter." Jordan didn't open his eyes right away. He simply tilted his head slightly, his voice calm. "I have a titanium membership." The attendant hesitated, her smile frozen. "Yes, but this section is. Well, it's usually for guests we see more often. If you'd like, I can direct you to the relaxation alcove near the coffee station." Jordan opened his eyes now, looked directly at her. "I've logged over 800 hours. Just not with your face around." The attendant flushed, murmured something inaudible, and backed away. The other guest remained undisturbed in his chair, snoring louder than before. Jordan stood, adjusting the sleeve of his blazer, and walked to the buffet station near the main hall. The counter was stacked with small white plates, golden tongs, and tiered trays of smoked salmon, artisan cheese, and imported chocolate. As he reached for a plate, another attendant, this one older, name tag reading Martin, stepped in front of him abruptly, one hand up in a halting gesture. "Sorry, sir," Martin said with that same professional smile Jordan was quickly learning to distrust. "This selection is for our curated experience guests, those who've pre-selected meals via the app or have dietary credentials logged." Jordan looked at the food, then at the man. There was no such option offered at booking. Martin shrugged. "Sometimes systems don't show everything. You can try the snack bar near Gate 51. We have packaged items there." Jordan stared at him for a long moment, not blinking, not moving. It wasn't the food. It was the tone, the way Martin said guests like it didn't include him, like he had just wandered in from another terminal. Behind Jordan, another passenger, a woman in a designer trench coat, stepped up and reached past him to grab a croissant. Martin stepped aside instantly, smiling at her with warmth he hadn't used once with Jordan. "Would you like it warmed?" he asked her. She laughed, nodded, and they exchanged pleasantries. Jordan stood there, still holding his empty plate, then set it down gently on the counter without taking anything. He didn't argue, didn't explain, just looked at Martin, eyes cool, steady, unreadable. Then he turned and walked back toward the center of a lounge where the seating area curved around a fountain wall, his shoes silent on the polished floor, the weight of every interaction not bending his spine but sharpening it. He passed another server who offered champagne to a pair of men in sports coats. No tray was offered his way. He didn't stop, didn't slow, but every step was now recording everything they thought they were getting away with. Jordan settled into one of the leather armchairs near the central fountain, his phone in one hand, the other resting on his knee. The room buzzed with muffled conversation, the occasional clinking of cutlery against porcelain, and the low hum of jazz filtering through the ceiling speakers. He didn't touch his phone, though. Not really. He simply held it, eyes scanning the room, tracking every pattern. Who received eye contact, who didn't, whose requests were answered before they were spoken, and whose were met with scrutiny. A pair of executives nearby laughed too loudly at something on a tablet, drawing a few glances, but no reprimands. Moments later, a man approached from the left, balding, late 50s, with a Rolex too large for his wrist, and a swagger sharpened by years of assuming he belonged everywhere. He stood in front of Jordan and gave him a quick up and down. Then, without invitation, he spoke. "You work IT for someone flying private?" the man asked casually, as if it were a reasonable assumption. Jordan turned his head slowly, meeting the man's gaze. The silence stretched for a beat too long, just enough to make the question sound as offensive as it was. "Excuse me," Jordan said, tone polite but cool. The man chuckled awkwardly, scratching the back of his neck. "No disrespect, buddy. I just thought. You know, the suit, the way you carry yourself, figured you were a driver or tech support. Don't usually see," he didn't finish the sentence, as if his own words were smarter than he was. Jordan gave a slow nod, eyes locked on the man. "I'm not here in support of anyone," he said flatly. "I fly solo. The man gave a sheepish grin, as though trying to retreat from a misstep he didn't quite understand. Right. Well, enjoy your flight. He walked away, already pulling out his phone, probably to text someone about how awkward it was to accidentally offend someone these days. Jordan exhaled through his nose, a soft sound with no emotion behind it. He'd heard worse. But the familiarity of it, the casual assumption, the harmless tone wrapped around a loaded presumption, still scraped. Meanwhile, at the front of the lounge, Olivia leaned over to whisper something to her assistant, a younger woman named Hannah, who had just joined the staff 3 months earlier. "Did you see the guy in chair 12? Olivia said, nodding discreetly toward Jordan. Hannah followed the gesture and frowned slightly. "He's titanium, right?" she asked, glancing at the check-in tablet. Olivia gave a dismissive wave. "That card could have been gifted. Or it's one of those legacy upgrades. Trust me, he's not the usual type. Doesn't act like them. Doesn't fit." Hannah hesitated, unsure whether to nod or push back, but Olivia didn't give her the chance. "You can always tell," she added, lowering her voice further. "He looks like someone who's never been in a place like this, without someone else's name on the invite." Hannah said nothing. She looked back down at the check-in list, then at the tray of gift bags that were usually distributed to VIPs before international departures. Without instruction, she skipped over Jordan's name when prepping the tags. Behind them, the espresso machine hissed. Olivia returned to adjusting flower arrangements on the welcome table, her movements precise, practiced, sharp. From where Jordan sat, he couldn't hear what was said, but he didn't need to. The choreography was always the same, and though the words were whispered, the effects were loud. A server passed once more with flutes of champagne on a tray. He offered one to the couple across from Jordan, smiled at the woman adjusting her bracelet nearby, then pivoted and walked right past Jordan's chair as if it were empty. Jordan didn't flinch. He leaned back in his seat, pulled his phone back to eye level, and began composing a message, but not for a friend and not for a colleague. He scrolled to a secure app labeled Nexus, tapped in his 6-digit code, and the screen blinked to life. The espresso bar in the corner of the Sovereign Lounge was tucked beneath a curved bronze awning, with marble counters and a backlit shelf of single-origin beans labeled like museum pieces. Jordan stood there quietly, waiting for his ristretto shot to finish pouring, hands clasped loosely in front of him. He was in no rush, though every second he spent in that space seemed to attract invisible gravity, pulling eyes toward him not out of curiosity, but out of calculation. Just as the barista slid the tiny cup across the counter, a loud voice sliced into the background jazz like a broken cymbal. "Hey, where's the bubbly, huh? No champagne for the chairman's kid." The voice belonged to Logan Granger, 27, dressed in designer streetwear, mirrored sunglasses pushed up into a mop of deliberately disheveled blonde curls. Logan was known in company circles, not for brilliance, but for birthright. His father sat on Sovereign's strategic investment board, and Logan wielded that privilege like a platinum sword. Jordan turned slightly, not out of concern, but out of habit. Logan saw him, registered the suit, the posture, the espresso, and decided, instinctively, that it was the perfect moment to play King of the Hill. With exaggerated swagger, he sauntered up to the espresso bar, holding a crystal glass of chilled white wine, condensation dripping along his fingers. "Move, man. Let a real member through," he muttered under his breath. Then, with one purposeful shoulder nudge, he bumped into Jordan, as if the lounge were a crowded bar and they were fighting for the same bartender. The wine glass tilted in Logan's hand, not by accident, but by intent wrapped in clumsiness, and its contents splashed in a perfect arc across the chest of Jordan's slate-gray suit. The white wine soaked through his shirt instantly, bleeding into the fine weave like ink and water. Logan stepped back with mock surprise, eyes wide in fake horror. "Oops," he said with a smirk that belied the tone of apology. "Didn't see you there, buddy." The word buddy was laced with dismissal, not camaraderie. Jordan looked down at his shirt, slowly pulled a cloth napkin from the espresso bar, and began dabbing at the stain with measured precision. His expression didn't change. No fire, no flinch, just a silence thick enough to cut through the crystal glass in Logan's hand. Olivia, standing near the concierge desk, had seen the entire exchange. She didn't move, didn't gasp, didn't offer assistance. Instead, she turned to one of the staff and said in a tone sharp enough to slice, "Can someone wipe down chair 16? Looks like it got a little wet." She didn't look at Jordan when she said it. She didn't have to. The message wasn't in the sentence. It was in the ease with which she delivered it, as if the incident wasn't just predictable, but permissible. Jordan continued patting down his chest, careful, clinical. The barista behind the counter had frozen, unsure whether to intervene or pretend he hadn't seen anything. Logan had already turned back to his group, laughing at something on his phone, high-fiving a friend who didn't even glance Jordan's way. No one asked if he was okay. No one offered a replacement drink or fresh towel. Not a single apology was issued. And Jordan, true to form, said nothing. His silence wasn't weakness, it was memory. It was calculation. He folded the damp napkin in half, set it neatly beside his untouched espresso, and walked back toward the seating area like nothing had happened. His pace steady, eyes forward. But inside his jacket pocket, his fingers moved. He pulled out his phone again, this time skipping past the secure app he'd opened earlier and instead opening a subroutine labeled JE Protocol, an internal audit command built not for communication, but for observation. Jordan returned to the lounge's central concierge counter, the dried wine now staining his shirt like a silent badge of disregard. The fabric had stiffened across his chest, visible even beneath the smooth drape of his suit jacket. As he approached, Olivia glanced up, her expression shifting into something between surprise and practiced indifference. She didn't acknowledge the stain, didn't ask what had happened, didn't offer assistance. Jordan adjusted the cuff of his sleeve and spoke in a calm, even voice. "I'd like to change this shirt," he said, tapping lightly on the counter. "Do you still have the executive wear selection available?" Olivia blinked once, then straightened. "The boutique collection?" she asked, even though she already knew the answer. "Yes," Jordan replied. "I believe there's a charcoal Oxford in my sizing from my last trip here." She paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make the exchange feel abnormal. Then she tilted her head slightly and replied, "Unfortunately, that service is reserved for guests with pre-approved financial clearance." Jordan's eyes narrowed slightly. "I believe my status provides full access." Olivia gave a small, clipped smile. "Normally, yes. But we've had issues with card validation lately. The system flags certain accounts for additional review before issuing merchandise. I'm sure you understand, it's a fraud prevention measure." Jordan reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and withdrew a black matte metal card, sleek and weighty, embossed with the unmistakable design of the American Express Centurion. Without a word, he laid it on the counter in front of her. The card alone carried more purchasing power than most guests in the lounge would spend in a year. Olivia didn't touch it right away. She looked at it, then at Jordan, and after a pause filled with more meaning than her words, she chuckled under her breath. "That's impressive," she said, her tone coated in condescension. "Very aspirational." She tapped the card gently with her manicured fingernail. "Let me guess, company card? Belongs to your boss, right?" Her smile widened, as if she'd made a clever joke, but her eyes gave her away. There was no humor in them, only certainty. Jordan's jaw flexed once. "No," he said quietly, "it's mine." Olivia picked up the card now, as if finally giving it permission to exist, and inserted it into the register terminal. The screen blinked green instantly, the transaction approved before her next breath. She stared at the screen, then back at Jordan, no longer smiling. But she wasn't embarrassed, just annoyed that the system hadn't confirmed her suspicion. "Fine," she muttered, reaching below the counter for the boutique access keycard. "We'll send someone from the private suite to escort you to the fitting area. Though," she added with a faint smirk, "we don't usually loan pieces for spills." Jordan took the keycard from her outstretched hand, ignoring the final jab. His voice remained steady. "It wasn't spill," he said. "It was a statement." Olivia's face twitched just slightly, but Jordan was already turning away, walking back toward the boutique lounge entrance, tucked behind a mirrored glass wall, every step measured. controlled, deliberate. A junior staffer was already waiting for him, tablet in hand, eyes wide as he noticed the Amex still glowing in approval on the screen behind Olivia. The door to the boutique slid open with a quiet hiss, and Jordan stepped inside, the temperature noticeably cooler, the lighting warmer, the air filtered not just for quality, but for comfort. As he passed rows of pressed shirts and hand-stitched jackets, he paused by a small wall-mounted screen showing loyalty profiles. His name was there, Jordan Ellis. Titanium. Status, active. Clearance level, board executive. He tapped the screen once, pulled up the security panel, and keyed in the 6-digit passcode he'd used earlier. A hidden interface slid open, revealing a private data stream, surveillance logs, audio captures, time-stamped staff interactions, all linked to his member ID from the moment he scanned in that morning. He scrolled down, pausing at the line marked, flagged by management, possible proxy access initiated by O. Harding. His eyes narrowed slightly. The boutique assistant, visibly nervous, handed Jordan a freshly pressed shirt still wrapped in its protective silk sheath. Jordan took it silently, stepped into the private fitting room, and closed the door behind him. He removed his stained shirt with deliberate care, folding it neatly as though even this moment, this violation, deserved dignity. The mirror reflected nothing of his mood. He buttoned the crisp new shirt, adjusted the cuffs, and stepped out, eyes colder now, not angry, but awake, fully. He thanked the assistant with a polite nod, returned through the glass-paneled corridor, and re-entered the lounge with a kind of stillness that signaled something unspoken had shifted. The guests around him didn't notice. That was always the pattern. Those who held unearned comfort rarely sensed when they were standing on borrowed ground. Jordan made his way back to the leather armchair he had used earlier, the one still slightly out of alignment because no one had bothered to reset it after he left. He sat down, crossed one leg calmly over the other, and reached into his pocket for his phone. This time, he didn't open the Nexus app or scan the data feed. He went straight to the encrypted dialer built into his device, a custom firmware loaded only on phones issued through Easton Financial Holdings, an interface not listed in public documentation, known only to those whose access justified its existence. He brought the phone to his ear and waited. There was no ring, just one soft click, then a voice, mechanical, precise, genderless. Command line active. Awaiting clearance. Jordan responded without raising his tone. Ellis. Jordan. JE41. Confirm activation at Gate L. Immediate. The voice responded instantly. JE41 confirmed. Investor override initialized. Secondary alert to terminal command in 5 minutes. You are now live. Jordan ended the call. The entire exchange had taken 10 seconds. He placed the phone on the side table beside him and leaned back in his chair. His breathing was calm, unhurried. He watched the ceiling lights reflect off the curved lounge windows like quiet ripples. Across the room, Olivia stood near the bar, laughing lightly with another staff member, unaware that the game she thought she was winning had already ended. 3 minutes passed, then 4. At minute 5, everything changed. The digital board above the check-in terminal flashed red. Not a loud alarm, not a blaring sound, just a shift in color so abrupt it turned heads. A blinking line appeared beneath the gate schedule. Internal priority code. Investor on site, executive override engaged. Staff froze. Olivia looked up, her smile faltering mid-sentence. The barista dropped a saucer. At the front of the lounge, the concierge desk received an instant push notification. Initiate compliance protocol 7B. All guest interactions currently under review. High-value stakeholder present. Olivia pulled her tablet out from the drawer, trying to refresh the guest roster, but it had already been locked. The system redirected her to a compliance interface she had never seen before, one that bypassed standard controls entirely. Down in the terminal's back-end systems, the operations center lit up with internal pings. The regional director was alerted. Security feeds flagged a timestamp. All service interactions logged since 6:42 a.m. under the profile Ellis J. were now being analyzed by Sovereign's Risk and Investor Ethics Division. Olivia's name appeared next to 3 entries marked for review. Her heart rate rose. In the corner of the lounge, Jordan remained still, observing not with curiosity, but with confirmation. A second banner now flashed across the internal staff network. Investor tracking, JE. Secure all audio, video, and personnel logs. Audit window active. The entire building hadn't changed, but the way it was being watched had. The air grew taut, electric in its silence. Guests noticed the shift, sensing something invisible moving beneath the marble and glass. Olivia stepped away from the bar, walking briskly toward the reception desk. Her voice dropped as she whispered to the concierge. "Did someone from executive fly in today?" "We didn't get a notice." The concierge, pale now, didn't answer. His eyes flicked toward Jordan, then toward the override alert still pulsing on his screen. Behind them, the door to the operations room unlocked remotely with a soft chime, and a senior floor officer emerged, eyes scanning the lounge with focus. The officer who emerged from the back corridor walked quickly, not with panic, but with unmistakable purpose. His dark navy blazer bore the sovereign insignia stitched in gold thread, and on his lapel was a platinum pin only worn by senior operations officers with direct access to corporate channels. He scanned the room until his gaze landed on the man seated calmly in chair 16, the man who hadn't moved much, hadn't raised his voice once, but whose presence now made the entire terminal hold its breath. The officer's name was David Lynn, Director of Ground Operations for the West Coast sector, and he was not a man who bowed easily. But as he approached Jordan, his voice lowered and his posture adjusted itself with practiced reverence. "Mr. Ellis," he said, quietly but clearly, "we deeply apologize for the misunderstanding. We were not informed of your arrival. Had we known you were attending today's board session, we would have prepared the executive suite accordingly." Jordan looked up, expression unreadable, his voice level. "You didn't know," he repeated. "That's true." Lynn nodded, visibly uneasy. "I'll make sure the boardroom is opened and staffed immediately. Would you prefer a private entrance or—" Jordan raised a hand gently to stop him. "No need. I'll walk." Lynn gave a respectful nod, then stepped aside, uncertain whether to leave or remain within view. Jordan slowly stood, adjusting his cuffs, his movement as controlled as every word he'd spoken that morning. The room had grown noticeably quieter. Conversations faded. Even those who didn't know what was happening sensed the sudden imbalance in the atmosphere. Olivia stood near the front counter, arms crossed, a tablet clutched tightly against her chest. She was watching, lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes no longer sharp with control, but wide with realization. Jordan turned toward her slowly, unhurried, like time itself had been slowed for the sake of this exact moment. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The silence carried everything. "You were right earlier," he said, locking eyes with her. "This isn't the kind of place for me." Olivia blinked, her jaw slightly parted, but she said nothing. Jordan took a small step forward, his tone like iron covered in velvet. "Because I didn't come here to be seated," he continued. "I came to see who's sitting in places they were never meant to lead." Olivia stiffened, color draining from her face. David Lynn glanced between them, clearly aware that he was witnessing not just a correction, but a reckoning. The surrounding staff now watched from subtle corners, no longer pretending not to see. A few feet away, the champagne bar had gone still, glasses untouched, servers frozen mid-motion. Jordan didn't linger. He turned, picked up his coat, and began walking toward the executive wing with Lynn falling into step beside him. As they passed the reception desk, Olivia remained rooted to the floor, the tablet now trembling slightly in her grasp. Hannah, her assistant, looked up from behind the counter and instinctively stepped away. At the far end of the lounge, the double doors leading to the investor suites opened automatically as Jordan approached. Security detail, previously invisible, now emerged from discreet panels and followed at a respectful distance. Every camera in the lounge had already locked onto him, not by facial recognition, but by override command. The system didn't just know who he was now. It knew who had ignored him, who had flagged his name, who had dismissed the credentials that required no explanation. And above the staff command terminals, a quiet but blinding red banner flashed again. Full investor engagement class A oversight, prepare for on-site review. Olivia looked at the screen, her hands still, her thoughts no longer defensive, but unraveling. By the time Jordan entered the boardroom, the message had already begun to ripple outward. The Sovereign Air internal network lit up with silent protocol activations and reassignments cascading across terminals in every lounge across the Western region. Security logs were downloaded. Audio transcripts from the past 3 hours were compiled, cross-referenced, and timestamped. In the corner of the operations center, the compliance officer pressed send on a restricted access bulletin flagged with a level 1 sensitivity tag. It landed in the inboxes of 13 people across 3 divisions and was opened in less than 60 seconds. The title was simple but chilling: Internal Incident Report Discriminatory Misconduct Involving Strategic Investor. Olivia Harding's name was listed first, followed by Hannah Grant, Martin Paxton, and 2 other employees who had logged service overrides under the Ellis profile. Their terminals were locked remotely before their shifts had even ended. At 2:17 p.m., they each received a short notification on their Sovereign Air issue tablets. Access suspended, internal HR review pending. Effective immediately. Word traveled faster through silence than it ever could through noise. The lounge was abnormally still now. Hannah sat in the break room staring at her access badge as the red light on the scanner blinked repeatedly. Olivia was in the back corridor with her earpiece out, pacing, phone pressed to her ear as she called her regional manager. "It was a mistake," she said, voice low but trembling. "A misunderstanding. No one told me who he was." But her manager's tone was flat. "You didn't need to know who he was, Olivia. You just needed to treat him like anyone who walked in with a valid titanium credential." Olivia's lips parted, searching for a defense that wouldn't make things worse. "There were inconsistencies, and now we have a Class A override on every log you touched this morning. Compliance is involved. Ethics is involved. You need to leave the floor. They'll be contacting you directly." The line went dead before she could say another word. Downstairs, another confrontation was unfolding, not in the staff hallways, but in a private conference suite reserved for investor families. Logan Granger sat slouched in a high-backed leather chair, his phone buzzing nonstop with group chats he was now too embarrassed to respond to. His father, Gerald Granger, stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, expression carved from granite. "You poured wine on him?" Gerald asked, voice not raised but steeped in disbelief. Logan tried to shrug it off. "It wasn't like that. I bumped into him. He overreacted." Gerald didn't blink. He didn't react at all. "That's the point. And you didn't bump into him. You embarrassed this company. You embarrassed me. And you endangered the entire merger timeline." Logan scoffed. "How was I supposed to know he was on the board?" Gerald stepped forward. "You weren't supposed to know. You were supposed to act like a decent human being. That's the minimum. And you failed." He turned, reached into his briefcase, and pulled out a single page, already signed. He dropped it on the table in front of Logan. "Effective immediately. Your access to the discretionary trust accounts is revoked. Your name is removed from all standing investment proxies. And your seat at the July investor retreat is vacated." Logan's face twisted. "You're cutting me off? Over a shirt and some attitude?" Gerald leaned in, his voice ice. "You didn't just ruin your own name. You shaved 4% off our families standing in the next round of investor alignment. 4%, Logan. That's $22 million in leverage gone because you decided to act like a child in front of a man who could buy and sell the entire terminal." Logan's hands clenched around the edge of the table, but the words wouldn't come. His father grabbed his coat and turned without another glance. "You don't carry this name anymore. At least not where it matters." Logan sat frozen, his reflection warped in the glossy table beneath him. Elsewhere, Jordan walked the corridor between the boardroom and the executive wing, phone in hand, scanning the preliminary compliance report now available through his private dashboard. It listed every infraction by timestamp, by staff member, by tone of voice. The system had recorded not only what was said, but how it was said, and to whom. He scrolled to the entry marked 8:14 a.m., unauthorized behavioral flag applied. Source, Oda Harding. He tapped it once, tagging it for elevated scrutiny. The boardroom at Sovereign Air's headquarters was quieter than usual, not for lack of attendance, but because of the weight that had settled over the room since the internal report had been distributed that morning. 15 directors sat around the long table, each with a copy of the formal findings in front of them, their names listed under a heading titled Oversight Recipients Internal Audit Level Alpha. On the projection screen, a summary of flagged behavioral incidents scrolled with clinical indifference, time-stamped service denials, unauthorized tone markers, selective privilege distribution. All of it had been automatically compiled from a system they thought only monitored for security, not for ethics. At the far end of the table, Jordan Ellis stood without raising his voice, wearing the same calm that had made the entire executive wing stop under his gaze 12 hours earlier. But this time, he wasn't there as an observer. He was speaking. His title, Investor Liaison and Strategic Equity Officer, had always carried weight in legal documents. Today, it carried something heavier, lived authority. He looked out across the room at people who had smiled too often at reports and too little at consequences. "I've read every word of this report," Jordan said, voice clear but measured. "And before you all tell me that what happened in that lounge was an isolated incident, I want you to remember this. You can't isolate what you refuse to measure. Don't tell me I'm a one-off, a statistical blip, a bad Tuesday. The system doesn't discriminate. Unless someone like me walks into it, that's when it starts glitching. That's when people get suspicious. That's when credentials get flagged, not because they're fake, but because the face behind them doesn't fit the pattern someone's decided is normal." A silence followed that no one dared break. Jordan picked up the remote and clicked the screen behind him to a new slide. It displayed an organizational flowchart, not of departments, but of decision points within guest interactions. Red boxes marked moments where bias had entered the system through human intervention. "This is where culture becomes code," he said, "where behavior stops being random and starts becoming policy without needing a vote." A few seats down, one director opened his mouth, then thought better of it. Jordan turned the screen off and stepped away from the podium, walking back to his seat. But before he sat, he paused and reached for a folder in front of him, an unmarked envelope sealed with a platinum-accented clip. He opened it, withdrew a single document, and laid it flat on the table. "This," he said, "is a mandate. Effective immediately, Sovereign Air will initiate a complete retraining of all VIP service personnel across North America. This includes behavioral analytics, internal bias disruption, and guest treatment parity." He signed the document without looking down, his pen gliding across the line as though it had been waiting for years. "We don't need our guests to look wealthy," he said quietly. "We need our staff to look like they understand what respect is." Around the table, no one moved. The silence wasn't resistance, it was reckoning. On the far wall, the projection system blinked to black, then updated with a new header. "Equity Mandate Phase 1 Activation, confirmed." In the room behind the boardroom glass, assistants began typing furiously, updating internal rosters, flagging training protocols, and issuing calendar invitations marked with the word mandatory. Jordan sat down at last, folding his hands over the edge of the table, eyes steady. On the tablet in front of him, a secure message from the Easton Holdings Oversight Committee popped up. Final signature confirmed. Governance leverage secured. Phase 2 pending. He tapped back once, only 3 words, "They'll feel it." In the hallway outside, a junior PR manager answered a call from media relations asking for a response on the circulating reports about investor profiling. Her voice trembled slightly as she answered, "No comment. Internal actions are underway." But Jordan knew that actions spoke louder than spin, especially when they rewrote not the story, but the standard. If this story made you pause, reflect, or feel something real, don't forget to subscribe for more narratives that dig deeper than the surface. What moment hit you the hardest? Which twist did you see coming? And which one caught you off guard? And where in the world are you watching from? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every one.